So just to start off with, we're going to have a little bit of a chat about how you might want to develop a preparation plan and the kind of things you might want to do. And then you're going to speak with some really good scorers in the past. So we have Zaina and Sarah about the kind of mindset they built when they did well in the UCAT and the sorts of things you might want to do. And then we're going to explore each of the different subsections in a little bit of detail to make sure you have all the different tips and strategies you need to answer all of the different question types. So this is our plan for today, and we're going to be working until 1 on quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning. And then you want to make sure you come back in time, kind of well before 2 o'clock, and then we can start promptly at 2 with our abstract reasoning. And so, just to start off with for today, I know a lot of you in the chat have been talking about approach to preparation and kind of how long you need to spend, what you need to do. So, what I would say, we have a rough guide here for what you might want to do if you have around 6 weeks left, as I think that is probably how long a lot of you are going to have if you've got your exams, say, at the start of September. But even if you have a little bit more than this or a little bit less than this, I really wouldn't worry. So, on the whole, kind of if you have 6 weeks or a little bit more, people in the past have done super well with that amount of time. So, I would not worry if you have anywhere around 6 weeks. And even if it's a bit less or a bit more, the best thing you can do now is just to get started. And the more time you give yourself, the less stressful it's going to be, the more opportunities you have to try out different approaches, different strategies. So, in terms of how you want to plan out your preparation, what we're saying is that you want to start off with maybe a little bit of untimed practice. And remember, the only reason you're doing this untimed practice is to make sure you're learning how to do the different question types and how to get them right. Now, as soon as you find that you're getting the questions right, at that point, the untimed practice maybe isn't necessary anymore. So start off with untimed, and as soon as you find I can actually do this, I can get this right, you straight away want to get started with some timed practice. And you might want to time with your phone, or if you're using a question bank, then they'll have timing options on there. And once you've started to get the hang of getting the questions done under timed preparation, then as you get closer to the exam, you might want to start doing lots of different mock exams to familiarize yourself with the actual format of the UCAT, which is obviously 2 hours straight of sitting and doing questions, which is quite tricky. Now, in terms of what you want to do with these scores, all the questions you're doing, the idea is not just to sit there and do hundreds and hundreds every day and nothing else. So that's not going to be very helpful. And the whole point of doing these questions is to make sure you're reflecting and reviewing on them. So have a think, maybe, did you go wrong? And if so, where maybe did you go wrong and how? So are there any clues in the question that you missed? Or is there anything that you couldn't figure out? That's the kind of thing you're looking for. And if you find that you get something wrong, then maybe before you go look at the answer, have a think about why you got it wrong and how you might be avoiding making that mistake in the future. Now, it's also a good idea to try and track your scores. And particularly if you use the UCAT official website, it's not actually going to give you a score out of 3,600. So what it will do, it will give you scores like, say, 45 out of 50. And so what you can do is we have here, for example, the My UCAT score converter. And so if you just search score converter on Google, this will be like the third or fourth result. And you can put in your scores and you can see maybe how you did on each of your 4 subsections. And if you track your progress, then you can see maybe what you're doing well on, what you're maybe not doing quite as well on, and the stuff you're doing a bit less well on, you might want to dedicate a bit more time to. Now, in terms of what you want to make sure you use, you definitely want to make sure to start off with, you're using the free UCAT official website, and that's going to be the most important resource as it's set by the people who actually write the exam. But if you find that you're running out of questions on the UCAT official website, then you can definitely use other question banks. And I know there are a lot of commercial ones out there that you've probably heard of. So stuff like Medify, MedEntry. And if you can get them, then amazing. Obviously, it's good practice. But if you can't, then I would like to make you aware of this thing called Pass Medicine, which is a completely free question bank that you can use alongside the UCAT website. And so if you can't get access to any other question bank, this is something that you should really consider using. Now, before we start to talk about the different subsections, we have a couple more people from Medics&Me, so current medical students, who are going to give you a bit more advice on how they structured their preparation and especially maybe how they balance that alongside other things. So if I would like to welcome Sarah now, if you're free.
Yeah.
And so Sarah, right.
So hi, I'm Sarah. I'm going into my third year of medicine at Nottingham. And I just wanted to talk quickly about a couple of things to do with time management around UCAT. I ended up booking my exam in late September and I booked it quite late on. So I had about 6 weeks of revision time. And 3 or 4 of those were while I was back at school doing 4A levels. So I had to learn quite quickly about kind of like time management, and I've seen quite a few questions about a couple of things to do with that. So one of the best resources I used for that is a website called Get Revising. If you just search on Google Get Revising Study Planner, it will be the first link that comes up. And it's basically like a free online system that makes you a revision timetable. So you block off time where you know you can't revise. So maybe for school, if you work and you've got job shifts, if you've maybe got a weekend or two where you've got something on, you fill those in first, and then you enter your exam date. So for me, I did all the sections of the UCAT as separate exams, and I put those in on the same day. You then put in how many hours you want to do for each of those. So everyone's going to do it differently. I kind of worked it out by looking at how many questions I wanted to do for each section. And then there's a website online, I think Medify might have a page on it, of the average time per question you'll have in the exam. And I kind of worked it out that way. And then you put all that in, and it will basically generate you a free revision timetable from now up until your exam. And it puts in your revision in little hour blocks for each section of the exam. And it spreads them out and it gets more intense towards the exam so that you can kind of like peak on the day is the idea. So that really helped me because you know then you're ticking off enough hours for each section. I personally fell into a bit of a trap of I'd maybe do a bit more time of the sections I liked and then not as much on the things I didn't like because I was trying to avoid them. But this definitely helps with that, and it's completely free. You just need an online account. So then, yeah, once you've made this timetable, which I'll put a link to it in the chat later on for people who want to use it, you can basically spread out your revision in those blocks it gives you however you want. I personally worked backwards from my exam, counting the number of mocks I wanted to do, and I kind of like scheduled it like that. One of the best resources you want to maybe look at closer to the exam is the official UCAT website. I think there's about 4 mock papers on there and then some practice questions for each section. I'd maybe keep these towards the end of your revision because these are going to be the most similar to the real exam. So I definitely try and fit those in. And another bit of advice for the people who might be like I was, doing school or maybe you're working alongside revising for the UCAT, is to be very clear with your boundaries with your revision. So for me, I kind of tried to use my school day for A levels. So if I had any homework or test revision, I'd be doing those in my frees and my lunchtime in school. And then when I get home, then those evenings and the weekend would be UCAT time. So I didn't kind of like lose a balance between A levels and UCAT because that can be quite hard to do. Um, Another thing I'd say is it's really important to try and avoid burnout if you're someone who, again, is trying to balance A levels and back to school alongside UCAT revision. I fell into a bit of a trap at the start in the first few weeks of school of thinking, okay, I've come home from school at 4, I'm going straight to my desk and going on, Medify and doing all these practice questions. And I thought I was being really time efficient because, I was filling every free hour I had, but it actually ends up probably negatively impacting you. Because when on the days I would do that, I was starting to score lower and then I'd be panicking, thinking, oh, what's going wrong? I'm not making any progress. And I was basically just burning myself out and trying to do too much in one go. So I then started to come home and then I'd give myself like an hour, 2 hours of, no work at all, I mean, people do different things to relax. I personally do stuff like go for a walk or I'll sit and read a book or something. And then when you come back to it, you'll end up working a lot better and you'll see your progress more because you can get the same amount done in a good 1 or 2 hours compared to how much you do in like 4 hours of cramming where you're not really concentrating. So yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say. So good luck for everyone. I hope you enjoy today.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Sarah, for that really helpful advice. And just to reiterate what she said, UCAT official website, most important resource. So made by the people who write the real exam. And you might want it to start off with. So you've got two kinds of questions on there. You've got the regular question bank, and then you have the timed mocks. So you have four full mocks, A, B, C, and D. And then you have the regular untimed question bank. So you might want to start off your preparation with the UCAT website untimed question bank, just because that's probably the best resource to learn from. And so from there, you can get a really good idea what's the kind of logic they use in the real exam, and especially for stuff that can be a bit subjective, like situational judgment. But then you want to make sure you leave some of these full mocks, A, B, C, and D, until closer to your exam, just like Sarah said, because they're really representative and they're going to give you a good idea of what the real UCAT will be like. So I'll now hand over to Zaina, if you're around, to give you a little talk about mindset and perseverance. Because kind of UCAT can be a really difficult, really exhausting process. And it's super important to make sure you remember to take breaks and you remember to kind of give yourself a chance to improve. So Zaina, are you around?
Yeah. So, hi everyone, I'm Zaina. I'm going into my second year at Manchester. And I just wanted to talk about your mindset, as Ojas mentioned. Um, for those of you, I'm sure some of you have already started revising, some of you maybe not yet, but I just wanted to reiterate that the UCAT is a hard exam. It's not supposed to be easy. So if you're getting frustrated, it makes sense. The nature of the exam is to test how you cope under pressure. So, you've got your different sections, you've got your maths, your verbal reasoning. All of those are designed to see how you can cope with the pressure in the actual exam. And so, first thing is to just remember that the UCAT is a hard exam. The second thing is, in order to give yourself like a good mindset, is to know your fundamentals. So give yourself time to understand the questions, practice without timing, and then move on to mock exams. One thing that I did was I kind of went straight into questions that were timed, and then I quickly realized that I was not getting the scores I wanted. So definitely take your time. Another thing is that when you're doing your mock exams, don't be disheartened if your scores aren't what you want them to be. Like there's always going to be room, there's always going to be room for improvement. So I remember that when I was doing my UCAT revision, I'd start off doing really badly, then I'd do a mock and it'd get a bit better, and then I'd get better, and then I'd get another score that was completely not within the range I was at. And don't get disheartened, is my key thing. Your scores will always fluctuate. And what you want to do is you want to recognize like what's going wrong, where is it going wrong, and give your time to improve. So yeah, another thing is on the day of the exam, you want to go in with a good mindset. If you go in feeling, not very confident, it's hard to do, but you should try and trust that you've done enough revision. If you've done your practice, you've done your exams, you've done the questions, that's literally all you can do. And then on the day, it's just about performing like to your best ability. In terms of revision, I would say definitely be frequent. Don't try to cram hours and hours because again, it's hard to do that, especially with the style of the UCAT questions. So do little but often and obviously build that towards your exam date. Try to be as calm as you can throughout. Remember that if things aren't going how you want them to, don't get disheartened. Just try to carry on, see where you want to improve. And yeah, that's my main advice.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zaina and Sarah, for that super helpful advice. So, just to add to that, we're all going to be trying our best to have the right mindset and to do as good as possible on this UCAT exam. But just in case it does not go to plan, one thing you should definitely keep in mind is no matter what your score, you might still have options. So, for example, there are lots of other medical schools that maybe don't put as much weighting on the UCAT as they do other things. So, for example, if you were to go for Belfast, Belfast has the majority of their weighting on your GCSE grades and only a very small weighting on your UCAT. So a lot of people had UCAT scores of like 2,200, 2,300, and still got interviews last year. So kind of the key idea is try your best with the UCAT, try and get the right mindset, but don't panic. So that should be a little bit reassuring. Like whatever happens, you're gonna have options, you're gonna have places you can apply. But obviously, we're still doing our best. And so with that in mind, let's get started. So in terms of your approach to the UCAT, it's going to be completely different to any kind of exam you might have done in the past. So usually at A level, the first thing is that you get as much time as you need, usually, to answer all the questions. So if you're doing an A level maths paper, you're probably going to go to the end, and you're probably going to answer all the questions one at a time in order. And you're going to show you're working, and you're going to get to a final answer, and then you're going to leave the answer on the bottom line. Now, for the UCAT, it's nothing like that. You've got extreme time pressure, so we actually have 228 questions in just 2 hours. But at the same time, it's multiple choice. So what that means is the idea should not be that you answer each and every one of those 228 answers. And so it's going to be super important that we prioritize what questions we're going to answer, and particularly any questions that we think are going to be very time consuming you might want to avoid and come back to those at the end in favor of some of the easier ones. So, in terms of how you're going to go about that prioritization, now the first thing is that we have this tool here in the top right hand corner, which is the flag. And so to flag, what you can do is press Alt F, and that's your keyboard shortcut. So the letter Alt and the letter F. And if you ever find that there's a UCAT question that you think is going to take you a while, even if you know how to do it, your best approach is going to be to flag that one, guess a random answer option, and skip and move on. And that then means that you're going to make sure you have enough time that if needed, you can get to the end and then come back. So what you don't want to risk is to end up missing out questions and missing out questions that are super easy at the end. Now we have here an example of something that a student has sent in when they were doing quantitative reasoning. And you can see here that they didn't quite get to the end and they've missed out quite a lot of questions over here, including some of them that I believe were pretty easy. Now, could anyone put on the chat, out of these questions at the start that they spent loads of time on, what's one common feature of all of them? So all the questions that they spent ages and ages on, what's a common feature about them? They got them wrong. Ekansh, very good. So the ones that he got wrong are the ones that he spent the most time on. And you can see why that's not really a good idea, but you can imagine why that's going to happen. Because the questions that are the hardest, they're the ones that will require you to do multiple steps, whether that's calculation or for another section, whether that's thinking. And when you have all those multiple steps and you try and rush through them, it's really likely that you type something in wrong and you make a mistake. So rather than trying to rush through the really long questions and missing out on ones at the end, you're going to skip those ones to start off with, get the easier marks in, and then if you have time, you're going to go back and take your time with some of them. And that's going to be an approach that can improve your marks on pretty much all of the different subsections. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that while you were at A level, you're probably going to be told by your teachers over and over, show proper working, show you're working out, be accurate, be this many decimal places. And unfortunately, with the UCAT, you're going to have to unlearn all of those habits. So the idea here is not to be accurate, not necessarily to always get the right answer. What you're doing is to be as inaccurate as possible while deciding which one of the multiple choice options it is. So one thing that means is if you find that the answer options are all really far apart and you only have 4 of them, then what you might want to do is round up some of your numbers. So say we had this long number here, 188 million, then maybe you just see that as 200 million, And then it'll be super easy to work out stuff like percentages. Now, another one we have is, for example, you have to add up these numbers. And that's something you might get in quantitative reasoning, something you might get in decision making. And so, for example, if we have to add up these 3-digit numbers, well, you know the last digit of these, if you were to add them up, is going to end in 7 plus 8 plus 7. And well, you know that 14 plus 8 is 22. So if you were to add these three numbers up, 137, 148, 437, they're going to end in a 2. So you might just pick the answer option that ends in a 2. And that's the kind of thing you can do. And so what you always want to make sure is you glance at the answer options first. And is it possible to be a little bit inaccurate, but still get the right answer? Now, the other thing you might want to do is, for example, if you have a verbal reasoning question and you have to check 4 different options. Well, if you're checking these 4 different options and you find that 3 of them are wrong, then the answer has to be number 4. So worst case scenario, you're only ever checking 3 different options. And if you start off by checking the one you think is right, and it turns out to be right, then you've only ever checked 1. So you need to be super strategic out of the 4 options where you start and which ones you check. And if you ever find that you have some idea or some sort of intuition as to which question is correct. And so, for example, that could be your own knowledge. That could just be based on common sense. If you think that one of the answers is correct, you're going to check that one first. And that's the kind of multiple choice strategy you want to keep in mind. And other kind of things you might look for is like the language. So if you have something and it talks about that this could be true, this may be true, this might be the case, that's probably more likely to be correct. And if you compare to one that has extreme language in, like all, always, none, never, that's probably going to be false. Because these kind of extreme words, all, always, none, never, they're really unlikely to be true because there are very few things in real life that you can kind of say are always the case for certain. And so that's something you want to keep in mind all the way through. So flagging and skipping some of the harder questions and using your multiple choice tactics. Keep looking back at your answer options. Could we guess this? Could we work backwards from the answer options?